In this lesson, we'll cover how to create layouts in Lumos using the new Lumos responsive variables and layout system. We'll cover how to replace previous workflows like UGrid above. Now, in Lumos, there's 4 key screen sizes, and they're based on container queries, so that when the user increases their font size, the layout can wrap instead of our design looking broken. So we have the large, medium, small, and extra small screen size. We can adjust those screen sizes from our global styles. So if we open that up, here we have our medium screen size is 50M, our small is 35M, and our smallest is 20M. So by changing those 3 numbers, we can change where our layouts wrap throughout the entire site, everything from sliders, tabs, and any custom layouts we build going forward. Now here, what we'll notice is we can go ahead and set this grid component to be a 12-column grid here on our large screen size. And I'll go ahead and set this first content wrapper here to be a column span of 5. And I'll set this image here to be a column span, and we'll go something like 7. And so when we do that, what we'll notice is when we go to our medium screen size, it's set to 1 column, and the layout just automatically wraps. And we didn't have to manually clear the column spans on the screen size. That's because when it switches to 1 column, what it's doing is actually just switching the element to a display of flex, similar to the way the previous UGrid above class used to work. So we don't have to manually clear the column count. Now, I can leave this inheriting from the previous screen size on medium, and then on small, I might switch it to 1 so that the layout wraps here. Let's say we also want to give this a bit of padding top and bottom. So we'll give it some padding block, and let's go with 8. And let's say we want to automatically clear that padding when the layout wraps. So what we can do is go ahead and do all unset, and we'll unset all the styles on this element on the small screen size so that all those styles go away. And let's say we want to pull the order up on this image. So I can do order first, and I can apply that to the small screen size so that this element jumps up to its first position only on that small screen size and below, but on all the larger screen sizes, it's in its default position. And we can use utilities to do things like hide elements with display none, do display contents to ungroup elements across screen sizes. We can change order to first, auto, last. We can unset all of its styles. So there's a lot we can do with the responsive utilities. Now, the problem with these is, let's say we duplicate this and we want to reuse this layout with different elements in different ways across our site. Well, let's say we need to make a change, like changing the order on this image or where things wrap, or even just changing the gap on the grid. Let's go gap row of 8. Now, any changes we make here, we have to manually do across every instance of this layout. So we lose a lot of global consistency. That's where the new layout component really comes in to save the day. So first of all, with this layout component, we can drop it in, and it just can use less divs because the content wrapper itself was 2 divs. And with this new approach, we can just drop in the heading paragraph button wrapper directly into column 1. We don't even need the content wrapper. We can drop the image or video directly into column 2. And we can delete the original. And then on this layout component, we have variants, like we can go for the columns one. And so here we are able to reuse this layout, and we're able to edit it. So let's go into the layout. And if we find a layout we like let's say this columns one, we can actually duplicate that and use it as a starting point for a new layout. So I'll call this my 5x7. So I have a 5 column, 7 column, and I'll duplicate that variant. And so what I want to do here is I can set the gaps and everything on this parent. I can go into the child. This is where the grid's set. And I can go ahead and set the column count on this grid. Notice it's a 2 column grid. I can switch that over to 12. Let's do that here. And let's go over to this first column, and let's give it a grid column, and we'll say span over 5. And let's go to the second column and give it a grid column, and let's say span over 7. And when we've done this here, what we'll notice when I switch it over to this new variant, we have this layout that we can now reuse with different types of content. And if we edit the style of this layout, it's going to update every instance of this layout. So it's much better than the old utility kind of approach. Now, here what we'll notice is we might want to go ahead and take this. Notice how it's a grid here on our large screen size and it switches to flex on the medium screen size, I could switch it to flex on the small or the extra small screen size. And we can also switch it to display none on any screen size. So we could do that as well. So if we look at our global styles, we'll notice we have responsive variables. And these are more powerful than the utilities because we can actually override these across different variants and we can use them with custom classes and anywhere we want to use them. So we can switch elements to flex or none across different screen sizes. We can change the flex direction between vertical and horizontal. We can change our alignments and even our position across different variants. So what I'll notice here is we can go ahead and take this. We'll go ahead and take this layout is wrapping to flex on the medium screen size. So let's go ahead and add some top and bottom padding to this column on this variant. So we'll add a calc. And we'll go with 5 rem top and bottom, and we'll say apply this to the large screen size. So this large is set to 1 on this screen size, but on medium, it's going to automatically switch to 0. So this padding will be automatically cleared out without us having to do anything else. Now, we could use any number we want here, or we can just search for a specific variable like space 8. And now I can copy that, and I'll use that. I'm hitting my equal sign to pull this up. I'll use that as the bottom padding. And so now this top and bottom padding set here, and it's automatically cleared here. Now we can also, if we go ahead and check this out, we'll notice that alignment is set here. And previously we used alignment variables to switch the variable mode. But in the most recent version, what we'll notice is that instead of alignment variables, this X here is just set to inherit from the X alignment on the parent. And same for this text, it's set to just inherit from its parent's alignment. And the parent element here, we never want to set a parent that has text to Flexbox because it messes up the margins, but we can still apply alignments to this parent here. So I can do align items and justify content, and I can set that here, and it's not actually really going to affect this element at all since the element isn't flex, but it will affect the children like the heading and the button wrapper inside since they're just inheriting from that parent. So for this text alignment here, I've gone ahead and set it to center on the medium screen and then start, which is left alignment on the larger screen. Now I could switch this to end if I want it to be right aligned. I could do center on desktop, and then I could do start, which is left align on the medium screen. And whatever value we use there for text align, we just also want to apply it to our line items and justify content so that these 3 values are all in sync. And that'll keep things centered here. And then when it wraps, it switches to left align. And if we want, we can go ahead and switch that over to being wrapping at a different screen size if we wanted it to switch to a different alignment on the small screen or wherever we want it to switch. We can go ahead and do that there. So I'll go ahead and just clear that out here. And another thing is on this column here, notice how we have like a default aspect ratio, we have overflow clip, and we have a border radius. So what that allows is across each variant, let's just remove some of this text so we can see. We have a smaller ratio here. Across each variant, that we can save the aspect ratio we want to use with that variant. So this one is more of a square. We can save the border radius. So this one doesn't actually have any border radius, whereas if we go to the breakout variant, this one is going to have rounded corners just on the sides here and not on this side. And so we can save all that on per variant by just editing the component here. And notice how we've gone ahead and set the border radius here to being the main border radius, but only on our large screen size for these 2 corners, and that border radius automatically goes away on the next screen size. So we can kind of just dial in exactly what that should be. And that way, regardless if we have an image in here or if we have a video or whatever it is, it's going to get the aspect ratio and the border radius from this column 2. Now, when we drop in a element that is not a visual, like let's say we drop in an accordion list and we have accordion items in here, what we'll notice is that that border radius and everything just kind of goes away automatically. And the way that that's happening is here we have some code that says for this column 2, whenever it has any child that is not an image, video, iframe, or overlay, then go ahead and remove the default aspect ratio from column 2, remove its border radius and overflow so that we're not cropping or forcing any non-visual element to an aspect ratio. But when we have only a visual element in here, like one of these, then it gets that default ratio. So if I have an image in here, inside column with an accordion, column 2 will not have any kind of aspect ratio at all. But when I have only the image, that's when column 2 gets its aspect ratio and its border radius and everything like that. Now, notice how on this variant, this element here is aligning to the middle, and that's because this column here has this align self center. So I could switch it to align self start, and that would put everything up to the top like so. Or I could just say on this one column, I can give it an align self start here if I want to make an override here without having to create a whole new variant. So we can do that here as well. But if you find yourself using a particular combination of classes a lot, that's when it can be helpful to just make an entirely new variant. So that way you have more global control over a certain combination of styles throughout your site. But if you just need a quick one-off override without making a whole different variant, it can be helpful to just use the classes. So here we've gone ahead and set that. We'll notice that even on the sticky variant here, and with the sticky variant, we'll notice that basically it's sticky here and it's doing its thing. And then whenever it wraps, it's no longer sticky. So the way this is working, if we open this component, is this column here. We've gone ahead and set to be sticky by default and switch to position relative on the medium screen size, and then have some top offset by default, and then zero out that top offset on our medium screen size. So that position and that top are set here. So that allows us to have an element that's sticky here and then automatically goes to relative when the layout wraps. And so all of these variables we can use with the custom classes. And previously, this would require writing a lot of custom code for our container queries, and we're able to do this much more easily here by just using the responsive variables for these different kind of layouts. So let's go ahead and add our image back in. So we built this component, we've edited its style across a couple different screen sizes. And what's nice about this is any other components, like whether it's a slider, whether it's a grid filled with cards, are going to be attached to those same screen sizes. So let's say on this large screen, we actually just want one column, so the cards are stacked like this. Let's go ahead and give it some margin top while we're at it. And then whenever our layout wraps here on the medium screen, let's say we want it to go to 2 or 3 columns even. And then on the small screen, it can switch to 2. And then on the next screen, it can go ahead and switch to 1. So anything we're changing, whether it be padding on the card or the layout or anything we're changing at all, will be perfectly in sync with the breakpoints and the layouts set on our grids, on our sliders. They're all connected to the same responsive variables. So now that we have that set, let's just look at building this with a custom layout. So let's go ahead. I'll just drop in a section. I'll call this hero wrap, and I'll go ahead and add in some spacers, and I'll go ahead and add a hero contain, and I'll give this a uContainer class, and I'll go ahead and drop in a div here, and I'll call this layout hero layout. And then here we could go ahead and just, I like to keep the styles on the base class instead of using a utility. I just find it's a little easier to work with across variants of the component and stuff. So to do that, we'd just apply display grid, one row, and then we'd set our gap here to be our site gutter. And then for the column count, we don't want to just like increase the column count here because the columns could overflow. They all need that min width of 0. Like so, which is tedious to do manually through here for each column. So instead, it's easier just at the bottom to do grid template columns and then say repeat 12 times if I want a 12 column grid, and then a min max of 0, 1FR, so that the min value is 0, max is 1FR, and that way we get perfectly evenly sized columns 12 times. And that creates our grid without having to use any kind of utility. Now, if you are using a utility, you would just give it a uGrid custom class, and that sets the grid. It sets one row, the gap there, and then the grid template columns, its repeat is connected to a variable. So we could just change it out manually here. I could say repeat 12 times, or because it's connected to that variable there, we can change the variable from up here. So that's another way to do it. Either way works perfectly fine. And then once we have that grid, we'd go ahead and drop in a div for our hero content. And then we'd go ahead and set it to a grid column. And I'll go ahead and say span 5. And then I'll drop in a div for my hero visual. I'll call it hero visual wrap and give it a grid column. And let's go ahead and say span 7. And for this content, what we want to do is go ahead and under class attribute and give it a margin trim class. And that way it just trims off any margin from any children. I usually want that on all content. And we'll go ahead and just drop in a heading component in here. Now, we might want to be able to override this heading across variants of the parent component. So to do that, we would want to unlink this component. So I can detach. Now notice how it gave it this combo class. It's because I unlinked when I was on not the base variant. So I'll switch it over to the base variant, then I'll unlink. Now that we don't have to worry about combo classes or anything. Now I'm going to remove this class and give it a custom hero title class, and then I'll give it a U text style, whatever I want the font size to be. I'll go H2 in this case, and then I'll do the same for my paragraph. It's already on the base variant, so I can just unlink it, remove its class, and I'll give this hero text, and then U text style. Let's go with small. So we're changing the font size there. And then we can kind of just maybe give it some margin bottom of text. We could use utilities. I prefer to keep less utilities when we're building custom components like this and just reach directly for the variables we need. So I'm adding that margin bottom there. And we have that set. So let's turn this into a component. Let's call this section hero. And let's go ahead and put it in the group section and create. And for this, we don't want to really just drop in an image component. It's much easier to use the actual elements when you're building layouts like this. Whenever you're using the layout component, you can only use components inside. So that's why we would use like an image component. But whenever you have direct access here, it's easier just to use the plain elements. So let's go ahead and give this a hero visual image. Let's give this a cover absolute so that it just fills its parent. Let's set that parent here to position relative. Let's give it a default aspect ratio. We also probably want to give it a width and height of 100% so that if there's more text in here, it can kind of stretch out like so when needed. And on this column here, notice how we get this little extra space. We can set this to be align self, and we can do center. So we can vertically center it. We could do end if we want to push it to the bottom. Now, the problem is when the layout does wrap eventually, when it's set to end, this element will be anchored towards the left of the screen unless we give this element the width 100%. So wherever we're doing align self, we want to make sure that element has a width 100% so that when the flex direction changes, this align self isn't affecting the left and right alignment. It only really just affects top and bottom alignment. So I'll keep that set to center here. On the visual wrap, we could also do overflow clip. We could do a radius if we want. Anything we want it to have there, we can set. And then changing where this layout's going to wrap. For that, let's go ahead and go to the bottom. We'll do display. And I'm going to use the var of flex medium. So it's going to be a flex on the medium screen size. I'll add a comma, and I want it to be grid on my larger screen size. So when I do that, notice how all the UI is hidden for like the gaps and stuff. The settings are still there. The UI is just hidden. So it's flex here on the medium screen size. So what I can do is I'll just copy this temporarily and clear that out. And what I want to do is I want to set that row gap. Usually do that on the base class. So let's set that row gap to space 8. And then let's go ahead and back under custom properties, add that display back on. So the space 8 and all is still there. If we clear the style, we'll see it's still there. It's just hidden. So the gap UI is hidden, but that's how we would set that. And so now it's wrapping there. If we want padding, exact same process where we set that calc, and we can go 8 rem, and we'll say times, we'll say large screen size. Let's copy that and let's paste it down here. Whether we want it to be sticky, anything we want to change, whether we want to change its alignment on mobile, I can just go to the text align at the bottom, text align. I'll say we want the value to be center or start or end, and then what screen size? I'll say on medium, and then what do you want it to be on desktop? I want it to be start on desktop. So that way it is only centered on this screen size, and on the next one, it's just start. So here on our large screen size, it's start, on the medium, it's center, and then I can do the align items. That way I catch any button group and stuff and the justify content to also be the same value, and so that the alignment's set across each of them. Now, if you don't want to apply those three things manually, you can also do the alignment center, start, or end, which is going to set those three values for you. But it won't allow you to override those three values across different screen sizes. So if you need custom alignment across the screen sizes, applying those manually is helpful. So now that we have that set, we've built this kind of layout using only custom classes. So the same approach we use for the layout component can also be used for custom layouts like this one, to give us the most control without having to write a ton of custom code each time to make our responsiveness with container queries. So I hope this lesson helped with understanding the Lumos responsive variables.